Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine presented by all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find out more about us at virginiainstitute.org. And I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend and found folks that you can commiserate and commemorate those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for all of us to get together and discuss some of the most stunning things, like over the Memorial Day weekend, AARP weighing in on the free voting without witness here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. AARP back in the center square of controversy as to what is their agenda. Are they just an organization designed to help seniors as a voice, as a lobbying voice, or are they a political organization? And to join us to get into this a little bit is Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment. Good morning, Phil. How are you doing this week? I'm sorry, Phil. How are you doing this week?
What's that?
How are you doing this week, sir?
I'm doing great, but you're coming through a little bit faint here.
Well, it's after the weekend I had, I'm surprised I haven't fainted. But I appreciate you taking some time out with us. Here we are again with AARP acting as a political organization. How do we make this case to the American public? We've had several organizations start up as alternatives. You've chronicled how they're actually turning into almost a way the government can control the senior population rather than live up to what they need them to be. They have financial sponsors, price controls that are completely non-free market. This organization hasn't seemed to be in the center square of our news coverage since Obamacare, but here they come again.
Well, it's really strange because we're in a health crisis right now in this country that is overwhelmingly in the nursing homes and is overwhelmingly among the very old. And you would think that a legitimate seniors organization would be out front condemning the policies of all the governors that led to mass death in nursing homes in places like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Massachusetts, and so forth. Even in Virginia, you've got about 60% of all your COVID deaths in nursing homes statewide. In some places, it's worse than that. Fairfax, it's 75%. Fairfax only has 81 deaths in that county of 1.2 million outside of nursing homes. The rest are all in nursing homes. And AARP has been totally absent from this debate. In fact, the only advocacy I've seen from them during the coronavirus episode is they reiterated to Congress that they want to see Nancy Pelosi's prescription drug price control bill passed, which is, in my opinion, extremely anti-senior, because if you have government setting prices and threatening high taxes on prescription drugs, we're going to have a significant decrease in research and development and new treatments and new cures, which are things that seniors very much want and need. And so I think that the actions and inactions of AARP underscore something that we've been saying for a while, which is they're not really a seniors advocacy group. They instead function more as a marketing and advocacy arm of United Health Group, which is, the largest insurance company in the country, provides them over $600 million per year in, they call it royalty revenue. Interestingly, when they sell insurance products, they do not take a commission. What they do instead is they take a royalty for licensing their name, and they claim that this allows them to sidestep all of the various insurance rules and regulations for sales and brokers, and instead they're just licensing their name and collecting a royalty. And they recently got a lawsuit dismissed by saying that the way this arrangement is set up creates no fiduciary obligation of any kind on their part to the seniors they're selling policies to, and that it's an ordinary business relationship. That's how they got a recent Ohio lawsuit dismissed. And so I think it's remarkable how little actual seniors advocacy we're seeing from them, and how much they seem to function as an arm of their giant insurance partner.
Oh, I want to go into that Ohio case a little bit, Phil, because it is classically, and if you change the name, which I think you and I have done on several discussions about AARP, if you change the acronym to NRA, you would have pitchforks and torches in the streets of Washington or Columbus or Richmond about how the gun lobby has taken over our government. But here they are. They've helped elect politicians who have written laws that ostensibly look the other way. When if you were a financial advisor doing this, you'd be going to prison. You don't have to be Jordan Belfort to know that.
It's a pretty clever arrangement that they've developed that it seems to actually work, because they've been able to beat most of the lawsuits so far, and they did. This Ohio lawsuit was interesting. They basically said, look, they're ripping off seniors because people don't know that when they buy a United Health policy through AARP, they're paying an extra 5% right off the top. That's sort of, AARP's VIG or royalty, they call it, but it's really a commission, is what this lawsuit argued, and therefore it needs to be properly disclosed and regulated, and people need to know that they're paying it. And, AARP got this lawsuit dismissed basically by saying that they don't owe any obligation to their members at all. I think the quote, let me see if I can quote, the quote was that their relationship with their members, quote, is not one of trust or confidence, and that membership, quote, does not transcend an ordinary business relationship. That was what they said in their filing that succeeded. That's how they got the case dismissed.
It is out of the arrogance that they figure none of their members are actually going to read stuff like that in the press or in any coverage of it, and so they're not going to be called to it saying, hold on a second here, that's exactly what our membership implied to us.
Well, I wonder how many members are aware that their relationship is not one of trust or confidence.
Well, yeah. Whether it's AMAC or 60 plus, they'd be out there, bidding. But at the end of it, it almost seems like AARP, in many of the ways, the same way the AFL-CIO became in the 60s, was not so much an advocacy voice for their members, but a point of entry to those who want to control their members. So if you're a politician and you need the senior vote in your district, cozy up and do things for AARP, and they'll deliver it for you.
Well, I think that politicians kind of think that they need to sort of jump when AARP speaks and that they represent lots of voters and seniors. But we need to sort of re-educate politicians, because my view is that when they do their advocacy and their lobbying work, they're really just representing the interests of their for-profit partners, especially United Health, which is where they make more money from that relationship than they do from all their membership dues combined. And I think that it's had a major corrosive effect on our health policy debates. And of course, you mentioned Obamacare. That was the most famous example. Their members were 14-1 opposed to it. They supported it, and in exchange for their support, they got a special carve-out that their Medigap policy, their cash cow with United Health, is still allowed to exclude pre-existing conditions. They got that written into the law when everything else basically was banned from doing that. Those AARP plans can still do that. It was astonishingly corrupt, but it's pretty clear they put their business interests first and foremost in that. I think that if we could sort of recondition our politicians in state capitals and in Washington, that when they see an advocacy message from AARP, they kind of think, okay, this is United Health's position. I get it. And, look, insurance companies, they have as much right to advocate and lobby as anyone else, but it's when they use an outside entity as a front and pretend that they're representing the interests of seniors, and then they tell courts, hey, we have no relationship of trust or confidence with our members. I think that our politicians need to discount heavily the advocacy messages that come from them.
Well, that phrase from that lawsuit should be on every bumper sticker across the United States. And again, I'm not pushing for our membership in any organization, because sometimes I feel like these mass organizations lose touch pretty quickly when they discover that the directorates of these organizations have large amounts of power and prestige and sell out pretty quickly. So I am always wary of these massive organizations, in air quotes. Phil Kerpen, American Commitment, is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Phil Kerpen, American Commitment is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Phil, I want to circle AARP now back to their support during this healthcare crisis, where we've got chronicled cases, that horrific case of the 20-something mentally ill patient sent into a senior living facility in New York State, and then started beating up seniors because he had convinced himself that they had stolen his chair and his bed, and just frightening cases because this mentally challenged patient had COVID-19. They thought it was a good idea to put him there, and they're blind to that, but they're pushing these prescription drug controls. I'll play the devil's advocate. I don't believe this. If you clip this out and send it to Snopes, I'm going to say you didn't listen to the whole thing. But for the sake of the conversation, devil's advocate, how could you be against lower prices for statin drugs or things like that? Because that's going to be the push. That's going to be the one-sentence hashtag from AARP.
Well, I'm for lower prices, but I'm for doing it in a way that doesn't undermine the incentive for research and development and finding and bringing new cures to market. And one of the big problems we've got is that on average it costs over $2 billion to bring a new drug to market. And if government says we're going to set the prices, and if you don't like it, we're going to tax you 95% of your gross sales for the last year on that product, which is what Nancy Pelosi's bill does, it's very hard to raise the capital and to justify the investment into developing new cures. And so you might make existing drugs less expensive, but you're not going to get those new cures that we so badly need. And that's the main policy argument against the Pelosi price control bill that AARP supports. But I'll also make a different point, which is, there was a much better idea to lower prescription drug prices that the Trump administration had proposed and unfortunately has backed off of, that AARP opposed. And that was the idea of requiring Medicare Part D rebates to be passed through to seniors at the point of sale. Medicare Part D right now is the only government program where you can have essentially a legalized kickback, because the pharmaceutical benefit managers, the middlemen in the pharmacies who sort of organized all the retail pharmacies so they can go and negotiate with the manufacturers, they have an exemption from the federal anti-kickback statute that allows them to go to the manufacturers and say, basically, we want you to keep the price high, and that's the price we'll set the copay at the registers based on, and seniors will pay 25% of that, but give us a big rebate that we're allowed to divert to our own profits and our own bottom line. And they've been, even though they ostensibly represent the buy side, they've been pushing for higher prices, which they can pass on along with higher rebates rather than lower prices, because they can divert those rebates with the exemption they have from the anti-kickback statute. And when President Trump proposed ending that exemption, AARP opposed that, which I don't think you can make any sense of unless you know that their biggest source of revenue, their big giant corporate partner, United Health, that sends them $600 million a year, also owns one of the largest PBMs, Optum Rx. And so, they are against lower drug prices when it means lower profits for the pharmaceutical benefit managers. They're for it when it means less money for the manufacturers for research and development. But if you do it that way, it's bad for new cures, which makes it bad for seniors. And so I think that their policy position is, they're for lower prices when it benefits their corporate partners, and they're against them when it hurts their corporate partners.
Well, Phil, you and I have been watching this for a decade plus in all of your work. Isn't it classically what happens when the government gets in and creates rebates and regulations, the 2 R's of government, that somebody's going to figure out a way to manipulate it for their own profit and then not want to give it up when they're caught?
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, but that doesn't mean we don't need to keep educating people about it. And in particular, Joe, I think the key thing is we've got to make sure that our elected officials know when they see those AARP messages what the interests behind them are. That's critical. Otherwise, they're going to keep having this distorting effect on national health policy debate.
Now, this just came out over the weekend, and so you may not have seen it, but AARP over the weekend has joined the ACLU and the League of Women Voters to push Mark Herring here in Virginia to not just continue the idea for the June 23rd primaries, but to extend the witness list absentee voting to the general election as well, which just goes to show me that that as we've just chronicled for the last few minutes, AARP is not about its members, but about political advocacy. They want mail-in, witness list, vote harvesting. That we have chronicled cases. People have gone to prison in Louisa County here in our flagship area for doing this in senior living facilities, collecting everybody's ballots and voting for them. It's un-American. It's elder abuse, I believe, and yet AARP is out here pushing for it. Is this just another example of how they're just a political action committee, not an advocacy union for seniors?
It's interesting because in a situation like that, it's not necessarily the interests of corporate partners that they're advancing, but it's their own sort of political views and beliefs most likely that are motivating that, and that's a whole other aspect of the organization, the extent to which their ideological beliefs are pretty far left, and that's probably why they're doing that.
Well, and certainly not aligned, as you said, back in Obamacare, 14-1 against. In a marketplace, in a free market, Phil, a business that ignored the needs of 14 out of 15 customers, they'd be out of business pretty quickly. Why does that not impact AARP? What inoculates, pun intended, a group like AARP from having mass flight from their membership?
Well, they're a marketing juggernaut. They're very, very good at the direct mail marketing and the TV and the online, and they're good at what they do, and they sell an awful lot of insurance and other products and memberships and all this kind of stuff. And so far, every few years it seems a conservative group tries to say we're going to be the conservative AARP, and there are lots of them, and none of them quite pull off the trick of competing with them at scale, because part of what AARP does so effectively is they don't say, hey, we're the liberal advocacy group. They say we're for everyone, and they market and build that brand effectively, and I don't think anyone's really been able to break through that, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And certainly they go after the idea that your membership in AARP, quote unquote, saves you money, and your work at American Commitment continues to shine the light on the fact that it doesn't. It actually makes them money in the directorate of AARP and their corporate partners.
Correct.
Where can people access more of this? Just go to American Commitment online. I know you've written eloquently. Your books are chronicled, so much of this abuse over the time as well. If you haven't picked up, has it been almost a decade since Democracy Denied?
It's pretty old. I need to write another one. But if you go to AmericanCommitment.org, we actually, right on the top, there's a link to, we have what we call our Commitment to Seniors project, and it has all our research and information on AARP there.
Well, I appreciate everything you do, Phil. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
All right, have a good one.